last speaker is Catherine Alexander, a doctoral candidate in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. His dissertation is titled The Business of Eating Wood, about Juan and Lei Qingjiang. And her paper today is called Penitent Mothers of Vengeful Fetuses, The Price of Infanticide.
Thank you very much all for coming on a Sunday morning out for such a cheery topic. All right, so my title, Penitent Mothers of Vengeful Fetuses, The Price of Infanticide. What I'm considering here is really the moral price of infanticide, not the literal price of infanticide. And I'm considering, again, literary representations of infanticide, not the actual historical practice, what may or may not have been happening to baby girls in the 19th century. And this small paper comes about as part of my larger research project, which focuses on the place of Baojuan in late Qing, particularly during and after the Taipei War, when a religious revival took place as one prong of a region-wide effort to put back together what was shattered during more than a decade of rampant death and destruction. The aim of my overall project is to contextualize these generally unstudied texts within the larger framework of literary, religious, and social history of the period, and to get a sense for the reasons why they were so widely reprinted and even newly composed during the final years of Qing. What might be waiting within these popular texts to broaden our understanding of the conditions of this tumultuous era? And what can these written texts reveal to us about their creators and their audiences? Now, late Qing Baojuan have at times been cast as lesser examples of the dying genre, one which dwindled in relevancy as their contents in the chain came to reflect socially conservative, safe topics, rather than the more dangerous and academically sexy topics of heterodox religion that we find in many Baojuan. What happens when we actually pay attention to these late Qing Baojuan? We may find ourselves bored by the pedantry of morally upright characters who never had an unfilial thought in their perfect lives. And we may find our modern sensibilities irked by suggestions such that all good women might hope for is to be reborn as a man so they can get a little further in their next life. But sometimes instead we find something new and exciting in its own small way emerging from the study. And in this case, it's two new sources to add to the discussion on literature produced by moralists concerned with female infanticide, which Daniel has so well set me up for in his presentation, and both the consequences of the practice and the importance of efforts to prevent it in the future that they are speaking towards with this literature. So in the past 7 years, 2 books have been published about the history of Chinese infanticide. Drowning Girls in China, Female Infanticide in China Since 1650, which was published in 2008 by David Mangello. And then Between Birth and Death, Female Infanticide in the 19th Century, just last year by Michelle King. King's work, for a number of reasons, including that it's narrower in chronology, tells by far the most focused, resource-rich account of infanticide in China, both in reality and literary representations. But neither Mangello nor King take into account Baojuan at all. Both conclude, rightly so based off the sources that they use, that tales of the punishments meted out by heaven for drowning daughters focused primarily on the bodies of the girls' mothers, bringing pain and death to these women. King states, I quote, "Women never got second chances, and their punishments were often painfully inscribed on a hypergendered body, the very site of sexual reproduction." End quote. Now, never here is the key word, because in both Baojuan tales of infanticide, written by the same kinds of moralists whom Mangello and King cite, the moralists associated with Fetuses and his cohort in Suzhou in the mid-19th century, these penitent mothers are actually given second chances and promised good lives at the conclusion of penance. At the center of this web of various kinds of anti-infanticide texts sits my favorite major player of late Qing morality literature, Fetuses. who, in contrast to the Peng family and their terrestrial success, Yuji was a 5-time failed exam candidate at the local level, a local school teacher, and a vocal Confucian, what I'm calling fundamentalist evangelical, moral campaigner throughout Jiangnan. His efforts, originally confined to the small scope of his hometown of Wuxi, were catapulted to regional attention during the Taiping War, when his belief that the turmoil was heaven's retribution compelled him and his followers to increase the volume and the reach of their campaigns, encouraging philanthropy and decrying various social ills like infanticide and the disrespect of written paper or immoral literature. Yuji's earliest work, De Yilu, features a collection of essays and documents intended to help elite readers start their own Hui, like Professor Lucy already described. He also wrote at this time some morality poems in simple classical language, intended for young boys in school. As his sense of urgency at the moral failings of his neighbors increased as war broke up Jiangnan and ground on year after year, he latched onto the idea of producing easily accessible literature for the masses as well, and reaching to them through more mass culture means. Yuji's later works include a collection of morality plays, which Rania Huntington is going to talk about at the next panel session, so go to her panel after mine. He also produced an illustrated collection of morality tales for the use of schoolboys, an edited volume with filial piety tales for women, and it's also highly likely he authored Bao Juan. Now, another issue with Yuji's work is that, by and large, all of his work are published out of Xuanmiao a temple in Suzhou. Now, this temple, you don't need to read the text on here, but just take a look. He is Yuji, and read his Bao Juan. There's been a very convincing argument made that the first two Bao Juan on that list, Hanlou Bao Juan and Xigu Bao Juan, were written by Yuji. And the argument made is that by comparing the contents of these Bao Juan with his extant writings, you see an incredible amount of overlap and reuse of materials. I think another way to help kind of cement this is you see that all of these Bao Juan coming out of this temple print house, about the same place that Yuji published a lot of his own writings. It really seems to almost be his personal press, or the press from him and his friends. So let's take a look a little bit at what kind of anti-infanticide literature was coming out of this press in Suzhou. In Palacher's work on anti-infanticide movements, which Daniel also introduced for me, it includes 2 sheets of these broadsheet comics that feature stories about people who either commit infanticide or who prevent people from committing infanticide. And you can't see it, it's too small, but down on the far left it says, published out of the Jianzai at Xuanmiao. So another piece of information. This is the kind of standard story about infanticide. The snake baby trope keeps coming up over and over and over again, like a monster emerging. So the standard story, as it's represented in many kinds of media at the time, is this: that this unfortunate woman has had a series of daughters, and she has drowned any number of them based on the various versions of the story that you read. But finally, here she's pregnant. She's in labor for 3 or 4 days. It's not working. She and her husband are desperate. And her husband finally says to the baby, unborn child, come out, we promise not to drown you this time. And in the standard version of the story, the baby is then born, and it turns out to be neither male nor female, but to be a snake monster. And the snake monster attacks the mother, maybe also attacks the son, or the son dies out of fear. Sometimes the mother-in-law also dies because the mother-in-law was the one who harassed the woman into drowning her previous daughters. And in some cases the mother dies, in some cases she's allowed to live because her husband steps in and prays and the monster is repelled. Other versions of these kind of tales involve vengeful fetuses coming back to attack and kill mothers in other ways. You can see here Tom is on his way to take the mother's soul on the Palitre, and his associates redrew some of these images, so these are reinterpreted again here. What is consistent here, and this is another version of this image that comes from Fetuses primer, elementary school primer for little boys. So it's a book, 学堂日记, which contains about 100 stories, all written in simple classical with notes, sometimes with pronunciation guides, and then illustrated in this really effective way. And then Palitre takes the exact image and redraws it in his book. In all of these tales, we can really come to this conclusion that the mothers are the first line of punishment. That if other people die, that's kind of secondary to the fact that the mother's body is what we're writing the retribution of heaven onto. And I have one more piece to add to this. I'm not sure if it's from De Dian Zai, but it is from Suzhou, and it's a Nianhua. And here in detail again, we have the snake baby. And all 4 of these images are in Yuzi Xuetang Yuji. So this Nianhua took Xuetang Yuji as its base for the images that then came out of it. Does all of this indicate a particular vehemence in imposing karmic justice on women without offering them a chance for forgiveness? It really appears to be so. However, in Bao Juan, this is different, and I have a Bao Juan version of the snake baby story to share with you, so you can think about what has changed. The Bao Juan that this snake baby story comes in is Liu Xiang Zhong Juan. Liu Xiang Zhong Juan is a relatively unknown sequel to a very popular Bao Juan at the time called Liu Xiang Bao Juan. In Liu Xiang Zhong Juan, Liu Xiangyu is the main character, and she wanders around Jiangnan and encounters a number of different situations in which she is able to kind of provide heavenly guidance and explain things to people who are about to be punished for their sins. Coincidentally enough, every incident that she runs into during the tour of Jiangnan can also be found in Yuzi's Xuetang Yuzi is listed as the editor on the 2nd edition of Liu Xiang Zhong Juan. So he's got his finger in every pie of Jiangnan anti-infanticide movements. So in this incident, Xiang Yu is walking along and she sees a woman and a man out yelling that, come listen to us, kind of street preachers. And they have a flag. And on the flag, you see an image of the snake baby wrapped around its mother's neck. And then you see like an old woman, basically, who looks to be reciting some kind of sutra. Now, what this says, and also you have the characters Xian Tu Quan Hua, so personally appearing to exhort repentance. What you realize here is that, I know it's blank, it's intentional. What you realize here is that the woman carrying the flag is being advertised as the very woman who's struggling with the monster drawn upon it. So she lives, and she's vocal. 2 other smaller lines of characters give her and her husband's names and their village of origin, and all the things you kind of expect from the morality pictures I just showed you. But the story is different. The woman starts telling her tale. She starts off in the same way. She drowned a few daughters because the local village women started to make fun of her for having too many female babies. And after, again, an incredibly painful, protracted labor, she doesn't know what to do. Her husband is just struck dumb. And so she speaks to the infant in herself and says, come out, I promise I won't drown you. The infant's born, it's a monster. The husband faints dead away. He does not know what to do. So the mother-in-law comes running in and recites a spell related to Guan Yin and monster fleas. The family all lives. but the husband never regains the power of speech. They're often confused by this whole scenario. Thankfully, a wandering Buddhist monk comes along and explains to the woman that all of this is punishment for the fact that she drowned her daughters before, and that there are clear and simple ways for her to redeem herself from the sin and to even be granted a son in the future. And that way is to make the flag, go out and preach to people in her area, and that at the end of 6 months of doing this, her husband would regain his speech and she would become pregnant with a son. The monk also advises her, perhaps in direct reference to the broadsheets that I just showed you, that she is to illustrate the story of giving birth to the snake, clearly write it as a new essay, carve blocks for a handbill, and to paste it everywhere, in tea houses and bars, tell it profusely. Her public lectures are another facet of this penance. And so we see that this kind of creates a space in which infanticide is spoken about by the very women who are guilty of it. And her tale actually inspires a woman in the audience to break down in tears and talk about her own experience of infanticide and how she now realizes that she's heard this sermon, that she now has a chance to redeem herself and maybe have some more sons in the future. The second example of this is in a Baojuan that is attributed to Yu Zi. This is the one that's paired with Penguin Baojuan, published in the 1850s. This Baojuan, I won't go into too much detail, but it's about Xigu, which is related to the practice of saving written paper, Xizhizi. Often Xizhizi Hui would also conveniently go out and pick up grains to make sure that grains were not desecrated. The overall story is more about the foundation of your own Hui than it is about infanticide, but the frame is about the woman who committed infanticide. We meet her when she's an old woman. She's sort of at the center there, Wang Laoliang. And then she reveals to us in an introductory passage that she too once killed a daughter, and as a result, heaven took one of her sons away from her. She didn't really know what to do. She one day met a wandering monk. The monk told her, you need to redeem yourself by saving grains. I won't go into the whole story of the Baojuan. You can read it. I actually have it posted online, so you can find it and enjoy it yourself. But in the end, after she's sort of starting to see the rewards of having had this lifelong practice of saving grains, she reflects back on the fact that she still regrets having killed that baby. And her penance leads her to, even in her 60s and 70s, 80s, and 90s, she finally dies at the age of 100. It leads her to go out and preach to every woman in her village who's pregnant, to tell them that they should not drown their babies with chlorine, no matter what the baby is. And in the end, she and her family, her one remaining son who she lives with, they're rewarded by finding a treasure trove of gold under their house one day and doing some meditations. So what we see is that these stories in Liu Xiangzong Juan and the full narrative of Xigu Baojuan, when read alongside other anti-infanticide morality literature, demonstrate that there's a broader range for preaching these messages than we have so far known. We need to include Baojuan as part of that. But also that there's more range sort of in the mercy given to these infanticidal mothers, that this literature is about giving people a second chance. So in one sense, I think that why did they change? Why did the story change from the sort of very hard and fast, you commit infanticide and you will die, which we see in the illustrations and which is clearly represented and clearly explained in previous studies of anti-infanticide literature. Why change when we get to a Baojuan? I have a few theories, and I'd be glad to hear some of your theories as well. One is that the structure of Baojuan permits static characters within the morality tale to speak directly to an audience about their motives and their fears and their new resolutions. By nature of the text performance, the fixed story on the page comes to life. The image is immediately effective. You immediately understand what it is. But in the case of Bao Juan, you have that time in which to tell a more complex and more persuasive tale. So the Bao Juan offers this audience this formula of repentance in a way that doesn't really overturn the effects of this literature as well. It complements it. One phrase that often comes up in Bao Juan is this idea that heaven grants favor outside the lines. 上天格外赐同. And what I translate the line as ge is also the same character used in 功过格, Ledgers of Merit and Demerit, which Professor Brokaw notes that is founded in the faith of the workings of higher justice and affirm the underlying moral validity of the status quo. That no matter how puzzling the actual distribution of rewards and punishments might appear, there is rational and divinely sanctioned system at work. So in the middle volume, you could maybe think, well, they're kind of subverting the system. But really, it's about emphasizing the system. It's about paying into this ledger until you have redeemed yourself for your sins. Now, heaven's retribution is not as immediate as you might see in a broadsheet, but it will come, and you still need to be aware of it and follow the practices that Ryuzu and his cohort were so evangelical about spreading in late Qing Diamond. I have another sort of theory about why Bao Juan might have sort of changed the story as well, and it's that I think Bao Juan are texts that are empowering. That what they do is they empower their audiences to take part in a ritual where they earn merit from the listening and recitation of the Bao Juan. And they also empower their audiences to donate funding to take part in the collective reprinting of Bao Juan, which is another part of accruing merit. So the audience, one thing I should have mentioned earlier is that Ryuzu also wrote a play about the snake baby. And in the play of the snake baby, you don't see anything that you see from the Bao Juan. You see basically exactly that picture, but represented on stage. So again, the mother is the most evil of all of them. But so why in the play, when you could take a longer time to flesh out characters, is the mother still painted as just this flat character on which heaven's wrath can be executed? I think it has to do also with that an audience of a play watches passively, and they will not themselves become actors. But the audience of the Bao Juan listens actively. They take part in the ritual that is the Bao Juan's performance. They can even, if they're literate, go out and read a Bao Juan to another audience someday. It's a participatory experience that allows for emphasizing the value of the text as something that you want to reproduce yourself, and that the story itself takes on that extra dimension. Right, great. So, and then one final thing is that this tale in the Sun Zongjuan ends with this call to print and reproduce images of the snake baby and post them in high traffic areas. So you can also see this sort of cross-pollination between Bao Juan literature calling people to be active in whichever ways they can to accrue merit, and then the existence of such things like this, which we do find, which are ephemera, and yet we have a few examples remaining to us today. So I want to expand how much we look at what morality literature in the Qing had to draw upon, both in terms of the genres it could use to spread particular morality points, and also think about the ways in which we may be too quick to condemn the sort of immediate impression we get from this without thinking about the larger message that the people who produced this work, which was, you have a second chance. If you see this and you are convicted by it, that is your second chance. If you hear the Bao Juan or are convicted by it, that is the second chance. Look at these characters who have used their chances fruitfully and gone on to do the world. Thank you very much.